August 19, 1944, East Prussia. At Wehrmacht headquarters, Generaloberst Alfred Jodl leaned over maps scattered with red pins and pencil lines stretching from Normandy to the German frontier. Reports from the collapsing Western Front filled every desk. American spearheads were moving faster than any army in history. Too fast, Jodl reasoned, for the laws of logistics to permit. Patton has outrun his fuel, he told his aides. He must halt within days. No army can march 400 miles and keep its tanks fed. German experience, especially in the East, had taught the same cruel lesson. An armored division devoured more than 150,000 gallons of fuel per day when advancing. With Patton's Third Army now 400 miles from the beaches, arithmetic promised relief. The Americans, he believed, would stop. The Reich would have time to regroup along the Seine and perhaps hold to winter. What Jodl did not know was that 125 miles away, 5,958 trucks had already started rolling east in an illuminated avalanche of headlights. They carried 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours, the largest single logistics experiment in modern warfare. The soldiers who drove them called it the Red Ball Express, a name borrowed from railroad vocabulary meaning priority freight. It would demolish all German assumptions about the speed limits of war. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized armor would be roaring across the Seine. Within a week, Paris would be liberated. Within a month, American tanks would touch the German border. For the first time in military history, the decisive weapon would not be a gun, a tank, or even a general, it would be a truck. Their confidence wasn't arrogance. It was precedent. The German General Staff had written the modern book on mobility. They had invented blitzkrieg, perfected combined arms tactics, and understood better than anyone the tyranny of supply lines. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's initial triumphs had collapsed because stocks of fuel and ammunition sagged hundreds of miles behind racing panzer formations. Trucks shattered on mud roads, railway gauges changed, and horses, still 80% of German transport, slowed the planet's most mechanized army to a pre-industrial crawl. The German divisions advancing into the vastness of the Soviet Union had quite literally starved for petrol. So, in the summer of 1944, when reports arrived that the Americans had advanced 400 miles in 30 days, German commanders smiled grimly. History, they thought, was repeating itself. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, soon to command 47th Panzer Corps, wrote that July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Machines require fuel, not courage. Their mechanical advantage becomes their weakness. Having advanced so far, paralysis must follow." German intelligence confirmed the math. A Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on roads, less cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies every day. An armored division, 1,000. Patton commanded 12 of them stretched across a 60-mile front. That meant roughly 12,000 tons daily, hauled 400 miles inland over wrecked bridges and mined roads. General Major Siegfried Westphal, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, calculated on August 20th, even if they possess unlimited vehicles, which they do not, and perfect roads, which they do not, the American advance cannot last more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. The Germans had yet to meet an enemy willing to try. August 25, 1944, France. Inside a borrowed manor house near Le Mans, a room full of officers argued over slides of consumption graphs and worn-out supply columns. At their head stood Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres of the U.S. Motor Transport Service, a man with 3 hours of sleep and no patience for theory. Patton's divisions were burning fuel faster than charts could be updated. Rail lines lay in rubble. Depots overflowed yet sat too far behind the front to matter. Every conventional system had failed. Ayres slammed a pointer onto the map. "We'll make our own law. We're building a one-way highway from Cherbourg to the front. Trucks will run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except gas and breakdowns. 12,500 tons a day minimum." He called it the Red Ball Express. 2 lanes of French highway would become a loop. One road east for loaded convoys, the other west for empties. Headlights would stay on through the night, discipline replaced by daring. Military police would clear any vehicle slower than 25 miles an hour. Mechanics would ride with convoys, repairing casualties on the roadside or shoving them into ditches. Colonel Charles Thrasher of the Communications Zone staff stared at the numbers. We need 140 truck companies. That's nearly 6,000 vehicles operating at 90% availability. It can't be done. 36 hours later, it was. On August 26th, the first convoys rolled out of Cherbourg. Drivers from the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into GMC CCKW 2 1/2-ton Deuces and a half loaded with ammunition bound for Patton's artillery east of Melun. Most were young, exhausted, and, by regulation, segregated. Of the 23,000 men who would serve on the line, roughly three-quarters were African American. In a country that still forced them into separate barracks and cafeterias, they were now powering the most famous white general in the United States across Europe. Within hours, a culture formed. Trucks wore names in fighter pilot style: Detroit to Berlin Express, Hitler Here We Come, Patton's Blood Bank. They drove by instinct and radio slang, policing themselves. Slow trucks yielded immediately. Broken ones were stripped for parts on the spot. Any rig below 20 miles per hour was simply shoved aside. By the 28th, German observers perched on French ridges began reporting a phenomenon they could scarcely believe. A river of headlights, thousands of them, streaming unbroken across farmland. One reconnaissance unit radioed, continuous column, visible 20 kilometers.
No passing, no blackout. Estimata 1,000 vehicles per hour.
Americans have abandoned all discipline. They were right, and yet the sky remained silent. No Luftwaffe fighters came. The Allies' air dominance was so total that the Americans could afford to flaunt every rule of caution. General Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division watched through binoculars and confessed in his report to headquarters. The enemy operates a supply system beyond military comprehension. They neither hide nor pause. It's not tactics, it's production. German doctrine taught conservation and precision. American thinking replaced that with redundancy and speed. Where German planners prized maintenance schedules, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and built that loss into their timetable. A broken truck was just a statistic, not an emergency. The first week alone, August 25th to 31st, delivered nearly 90,000 tons of supplies, 12,848 tons daily average, 5,958 trucks, each making 1.5 round trips per day, 300,000 gallons of gasoline consumed by the convoys themselves. Numbers so staggering that captured German intelligence analysts labeled them propaganda. They were not. If anything, they were conservative. By September 5th, the convoy rhythm was mechanical perfection. Departures every 5 minutes, 60-plus trucks each, 5,000 vehicles always in motion. Average turnaround, 32 hours. German logisticians clinging to horse-drawn wagons simply refused to believe it possible. Mobile repair teams fixed engines beside the road in 15 minutes or pushed them into ditches for cannibalization. New engines swung from cranes and were swapped in 45. If bridges collapsed, engineers filled the gap with rubble and kept rolling. By the time orderlies forwarded reports to Berlin, the Americans had already solved the problem and moved on. To the Germans, the most disturbing shock was not the speed of the convoys. It was the fuel that fed them. The Red Ball Express burned 300,000 gallons of gasoline every single day just to supply itself, more than many German field armies received for the entire front. Yet barrels kept arriving, seemingly without origin. In reality, another American miracle flowed silently beneath the English Channel. Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean. Miles of flexible pipe carried aviation-grade fuel from Britain to Normandy. From those beaches, new steel arteries raced inland across France. By September 1944, German reconnaissance still hadn't realized that their enemy was literally pumping fuel under their feet. Along the Red Ball route, forward fuel dumps were placed every 25 miles, each larger than the entire strategic reserve of some panzer armies. Tanker trucks ran in parallel convoys, topping off any vehicle that slowed. Mechanics joked, If you can find us, we can fill you. General Major Walter Warlimont studied aerial photographs and recorded grimly. They burn more gasoline, moving gasoline, than we allocate to divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow. The effect was exponential. German military science had always measured potential advances in cautious increments, 20 to 30 miles per day at best. But pure mass allowed Patton's armor to defy physics itself. Fueled by Red Ball convoys, American divisions thundered 40 to 60 miles a day, sometimes doubling that. On September 1st, the 4th Armored Division drove 35 miles before lunch. Trucks were already waiting, engines idling, drums stacked high. They refueled, resupplied, and rolled another 32 miles before dusk. 67 miles in one day. German planners had assumed 30 was impossible. By nightfall, their assumptions were in ruins. At East Prussia headquarters, Colonel General Heinz Guderian, father of armored warfare, dismissed the first reports as lies. No mechanical force can advance 60 miles daily for a week, he insisted. It violates maintenance calculations. But Allied radio traffic confirmed the impossible. Engines humming, convoys coordinating by open frequencies. So confident that they didn't even bother using code. German intercept officers translated transmissions with disbelief. Red Ball Convoy 17 clear to proceed. Convoy 18 rolling. No camouflage, no pause, just motion. By early September, the Wehrmacht's own intelligence files acknowledged a catastrophic misjudgment. A secret report listed American logistical deviations from known doctrine, abandonment of damaged vehicles instead of repair, drivers operating on 3 days with no sleep, headlights on at night, zero camouflage discipline, fuel expenditures beyond measurable limits. Every line would have earned a court-martial in a German corps. Yet the Americans succeeded because their error margin was swallowed by abundance. Field Marshal Walter Model summarized it in his field diary. We face not a superior tactic, but a superior civilization. They hide nothing because they fear nothing. They waste because they possess infinity. We cannot defeat infinity. The headlines and numbers hid the human cost. The Red Ball drivers themselves fought a private war against exhaustion, weather, and monotony. They often drove 72 hours straight, eyes staring into fog, shaking from coffee and benzodrine tablets. Accidents killed 300 drivers in less than 3 months. Trucks collided, overturned, or exploded from overheated brakes. Still they rolled, fueled by pride as much as gasoline. Most were young African-American men who couldn't eat at white diners in their own country yet were feeding an army across Europe. Each mile defied 2 dictatorships at once: Nazi racism and American segregation. They painted slogans in bright enamel, Hitler's gasoline taxi and Lend-Lease lightning. Every trip was risk and defiance. German troops facing Patton began hearing an eerie chorus each night, the rumble of trucks. It never stopped. Even when convoys were miles away, the vibration traveled through the ground like approaching thunder. Infantrymen whispered that the motors carried American supplies directly from heaven, that their enemies had found a way to make war without limits. Some believed the sound itself was deliberate psychological warfare. They were right. American loudspeaker teams later broadcast recordings of convoy engines toward the front during quiet nights. German watchers reported endless columns that did not exist. Hearing became believing, and believing vitiated will. We had 3 cartridges per rifle, wrote one German corporal, while they hauled thousands of tons every night. Eventually, we stopped counting. We just listened. To German engineers, the trucks themselves were bewildering. The basic GMC CCKW 2 1/2-ton Deuce-A half looked crude but represented industrial genius. Over 500,000 were built. Compared to Germany's patchwork of converted buses and horse carts, the American fleet was a system, identical parts, engines, and tires. Mechanics could cannibalize a wreck and repair another in minutes. Features unheard of in Europe, standard 4-wheel drive, waterproof electricals, heaters that actually worked, turned the trucks into unstoppable beasts. Virtually every river became fordable, every field a road. Even more bewildering was philosophy. Germans rebuilt, Americans replaced. Germans hoarded spare parts. Americans buried broken engines and opened new crates. Skill was replaced by volume. And volume in 1944 was victory. The longer Patton advanced, the faster the miracle grew. When the main Red Ball route clogged, engineers and drivers improvised entire new highways overnight. They painted new markers, gave them new names. White Ball Express, Rouen to Paris. Green Diamond, Cherbourg to rail transfer points. Red Lion, Bayeux to Brussels. ABC Line, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Planning conferences lasted hours, not weeks. Overnight, fresh convoys thundered east. German staff officers couldn't comprehend the tempo. Their own regulations required multi-week approval for every logistics change. The Americans simply did it. They paint a sign, one captured German engineer muttered, and an hour later an army follows it. For Nazi theorists, nothing about the Red Ball Express made racial or military sense. How could black drivers accomplish what the Reich's best engineers could not? How could chaos defeat order? Yet those convoys racing through the night, manned mostly by men the Reich considered Untermenschen, became undeniable proof that Hitler's hierarchy of human value was a fantasy. Every successful delivery was a rebuttal carrying 5 tons of truth. Captured Germans forced to unload American trucks found themselves corrected by example. They were ordered around by African-American sergeants whose English was perfect, whose math was faster than their own. Some prisoners later admitted that these moments, not Allied bombs, began the collapse of their belief system. Behind the convoys, engineers performed parallel miracles. 40 bridges rebuilt, 15 major fuel depots created, 26 maintenance stations constructed, 8 temporary cities erected for drivers, all while traffic thundered through. When retreating Germans had blown the main bridge at Mantes to pause Patton for 6 weeks, American engineers spanned the gap in 14 hours. Convoys paused only briefly, detouring 8 miles on freshly bulldozed dirt. Captured Wehrmacht engineers filed stunned reports. They build faster than we can destroy. Even artillery mathematics crumbled under American velocity. In September at Metz, 13 Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. Red Ball convoys delivered every shell plus a spare. German gunners defending the city rationed themselves to 50 rounds per gun per day. The thunder of unlimited ammunition broke more than fortifications. It broke faith. Attrition would have paralyzed any other army. For the Red Ball, it was just another line in a spreadsheet. By late September, truck life averaged 10,000 miles instead of 30,000. 500 engines replaced per week.
10.000 tires consumed per week.
5,000 vehicles lost by fire, collision, or exhaustion. Yet tonnage delivered kept climbing. American production had anticipated attrition months in advance. Cargo ships arrived weekly with hundreds of fresh trucks still dripping cosmoline. 2 days of training. New drivers took seats left empty by the dead or hospitalized. Capacity rose despite losses. For the Wehrmacht, such economics were nonsensical. For America, they were business. French civilians living along the Red Ball route witnessed the return of daylight after 4 dark years of occupation. Engines roared through their towns every few minutes, trucks stacked with food, ammunition, tires, and canned goods. Each convoy was a parade of proof that the war's tide had changed. Drivers tossed chocolate and chewing gum to children. They handed out soap and cigarettes to villagers. Allied officers worried that generosity might threaten security, but it became the most effective propaganda imaginable. People who had watched the Germans take everything suddenly saw Americans give everything away. German intelligence reports in early September 1944 admitted the impossible. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. Resistance cooperation has quadrupled along Red Ball routes. American abundance didn't just feed armies. It reignited nations. By September 8, Patton's spearheads had pushed so far that even the Red Ball began to strain. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles, and fatigue devoured men and machines. Spotters noticed convoys thinning. Intervals between truck groups stretched from 5 minutes to 15. German analysts misread it as collapse. General Otto von Manschufel reported, "Their supply lines show fatigue, the moment to strike." It wasn't collapse, it was recalculation. Within 72 hours, American logisticians created new transfer depots halfway along the route, cutting runs to 350 miles each and rotating drivers through rest stations. Maintenance crews leapfrogged forward, doubling repair rates. By September 12th, the Red Ball Express was delivering more tonnage than before. American adaptability turned weakness into speed. While trucks dominated the roads, the sky became a second highway. C-47 Dakotas hauled 2,700 tons a day directly to the front, nearly 10 times what the Luftwaffe had managed to Stalingrad at its peak. To American planners, aircraft were simply flying trucks. They scheduled them like buses, no escort required, no pause for refueling delays. One German observer summed it up. "Their airplanes are warehouses with wings." The arithmetic was terrifying. The Wehrmacht could no longer slow Allied movement by distance. America had erased it. Perhaps the most bewildering revelation for German staff officers was how little hierarchy governed the system. Sergeants made choices that, in the Wehrmacht, required generals. Lieutenants rerouted convoys on their own authority. Thousands of independent decisions somehow aligned into harmony. German doctrine equated discipline with obedience. American success showed that discipline could mean initiative. The Red Ball Express looked chaotic from above yet functioned like an ecosystem, self-correcting, fast, alive. Even when the operation officially ended in November 1944, the habits it created, constant motion, decentralized control, and audacious scale, had already rewritten military logistics forever. By the time the Red Ball's ceaseless thunder finally quieted, it had run 82 days, moved over 412,000 tons of supplies, and covered more than 120 million ton-miles. 5,958 trucks average on the road, peaking above 7,000, 23,000 drivers, mostly African-American, 57 million gallons of fuel consumed, 180,000 tires worn out, 5,000 vehicles destroyed or abandoned. Cost is almost equal to $100 million. 1944. The return on investment. A war shortened by half a year, France and Belgium liberated, and more than 400,000 German troops captured. Each figure was a nail in the coffin of the myth that American industry was soft or wasteful. Waste, it turned out, was another expression of strength. Yet the Red Ball's greatest revolution wasn't mechanical, it was human. The operation depended almost entirely on African-American units still denied equal rights at home. When General Eisenhower visited the convoys in September, he watched men who had been driving for 20 straight hours reload their trucks without complaint. His aide noted the general's reaction. "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantryman." Their success forced moral arithmetic as well as logistical. 3 years later, the United States would begin desegregating its armed forces, a change born on those French roads. When captured German generals were shown the system in 1945, their professionalism gave way to awe. General Friedrich Schultz wrote, "Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of vehicles, thousands of men, millions of tons of goods, then made it disappear." Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg, added, "We invented lightning war but never solved its fuel. The Americans solved it by creating more fuel than lightning could consume." To an officer class raised on scarcity and spreadsheets, the Red Ball looked like witchcraft performed with wrenches. Even the numbers of destruction astonished them. Germans learned that during those same 82 days, the Red Ball Express consumed more vehicles than the Wehrmacht possessed in France, yet U.S. transport capacity increased. America had achieved logistics faster than consumption. Field Marshal Model later confessed, "We were not beaten by your tanks or your planes. We were beaten by your trucks." The Tiger tank, symbol of precision, met its nemesis in the rough CCKW truck, symbol of plenty. The trucks won. Birth of modern logistics. After victory, thousands of Red Ball veterans, white and black together, returned home with unmatched expertise. They founded freight companies, shaped highway design, and built what would become the American interstate system. Modern commercial trucking was, in many ways, born in those French fields under blackout-breaking headlights. They carried home lessons the military had proved in blood and rubber. Volume beats efficiency. Speed beats perfection. Redundancy defeats complexity. If you can keep trucks rolling day and night, you can move the world. By autumn 1944, even German high command conceded the inevitable. Field Marshal von Rundstedt's final staff meeting ended with words that sounded more like eulogy than strategy. The Americans have abolished distance. Our doctrines depend on it. When an aide proposed attacking the convoys with the few Luftwaffe planes remaining, von Rundstedt snapped. With what? They have 6,000 trucks. Destroy 1,000, they'll replace them in a week. We don't have 200 aircraft. That was the moment Germany truly lost. The Red Ball Express became propaganda without pamphlets. Every thundering engine was an audible declaration that American resources were inexhaustible. German soldiers began reporting ghost convoys. They thought they heard at night. The Allies capitalized on the rumor, broadcasting recorded truck noises through loudspeakers. Entire units fired on empty roads. Psychology had joined logistics. Supply itself became a weapon. When the Red Ball Express finally shut down on November 16, 1944, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. 23,000 men were reassigned, thousands of vehicles redistributed within 72 hours. The highways that had carried democracy to the Rhine reverted to French civil traffic as if the empire of trucks had never existed. Germans, needing months to build and years to dismantle lesser networks, could only stare at the speed of creation and obliteration. As one U.S. logistics officer wrote, "We build what we need, use it, throw it away, and build something better. That's the secret." In May 1945, as senior Wehrmacht officials surrendered, interrogators asked what single factor had made American power unbeatable. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring answered plainly, "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. We fought your factories." The Red Ball Express embodied that truth. Industrial abundance had become strategy. It proved that in modern war, victory favors not the bravest soldier or the cleverest plan, but the nation that can move its courage the quickest and farthest. 50 years later, at a commemoration in Washington, D.C., surviving drivers, many gray-haired, most black, stood as a postal stamp honoring the Red Ball Express was unveiled. A reporter asked one veteran what kept him awake for those 70-hour runs through France. He smiled, knowing every mile meant another mile the war would end sooner. They had driven through exhaustion, snow, and segregation and proved that democracy on wheels could crush dictatorship in steel. Final mileage.
Total cargo delivered, 412,000 tons.
Distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Fuel used, 57 million gallons. Vehicles employed is almost equal to 6,000 daily, 7,000 peak. Drivers, 23,000. Operation length, 82 days. German divisions defeated through supply advantage, 47. Estimated war days saved, 180. Each statistic is a sentence in the same declaration. The Industrial Revolution rolled on rubber tires. By the winter of 1944, the roads of France still rattled from that sound. 6,000 engines never cooling. A nation's heartbeat translated into gears and gasoline. The Red Ball Express made logistics into destiny, supply into victory, and trucks into history's loudest instrument of freedom. The German generals who once dismissed American logistics as wasteful stopped laughing when they realized what the roar truly meant. It was the sound of an engine that never runs out, the sound of a civilization accelerating toward victory at 35 miles per hour.